everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the beginner C++ tutorial. Today we're going to be covering the variables, all the different kinds of variables and how to use them in C++. So to begin with here, we need to know exactly what a variable is. Now, if you remember back to your high school math, then you remember that sometimes you would have something that looks like x plus 2 equals y. Well, and then it would say something like above it says y equals 2, find x, right? And this is supposed to be an x, not a c. So we can say y is 2, so what plus 2 equals 2? Well, that's 0, so x equals 0. Well, variables are the same way. They're just names to store values that can change throughout a program. Now I'm going to go through all the different kinds of variables, their sizes, and this is going to get a little complicated, so bear with me, and you do not need to memorize these right off the bat by any means, especially the range or the size of these variables. So the first thing we have is an integer, and you declare it by typing int, and that is an integer. And this number can be anywhere from -2,147,483,648 to 2,147,483,647. So it's got a very, very long range, and most of these integers do. And we're going to get more into that range in the future. Just know that is the range of it. It can't hold a number. For instance, it can't hold 3 billion. It's just too big of a number to store in this integer. And we'll get more into that in future episodes because it can get a little bit complicated really quickly if we go too far forward. So when we're declaring a variable, we just type the variable type, the name that we want to name the variable. So this can be anything. It can be hello if we wanted it to be. And then we use closing braces. Now this variable is created. It's declared is what it's the actual technical term. So we declared the integer variable as hello. And we can use this variable. We can set hello to something. So if we type hello is equal to 5. Well, that's good. Now we can also set it up here where we actually declared the variable. We can say hello is equal to 5. And that's the same thing as what we were doing. Sometimes it's really up to you whether you want to set them. Sometimes you have to if your program is written in a certain way. Now that's just how to declare variables. I wanted to go over that quickly before we moved on. So again, this is an integer. What an integer is it stores a whole number value from, again, that negative range to the positive range. It has to be a whole number. It cannot be decimals. And the reason for that is that it doesn't know how to read decimals, and that's why it's got such a large range. And we'll get into that again in the future, what happens when you try and store a decimal in. And again, that can get kind of complicated, so in the next couple episodes we'll get into that as well. So the next thing that we have is an unsigned int, and we declare these by just saying unsigned int, and this is an unsigned integer. Now you notice that the beginning part of this word is uncapitalized and the second word is capitalized. Well, that doesn't need to be that way. This is called hump formatting. So it's like it's the lowercase, and then the second word has uppercase, and then the third word would have an uppercase. And this is just to make it a little bit more readable, and to keep kind of a naming convention in place. So this is an unsigned integer. It's the same as an integer. The only difference is the value that it can store in it. Instead of being able to store -2 billion to +2 billion, this can actually store 0 to 4,294,967,295. And again, you don't need to remember the actual range of values here, but it can store quite a bit. Now that range is not set either. Different operating systems will have different range values, and it's can get really complicated really quickly. I know I keep saying that, but we just need to go into the different types of variables. So that can store only positive integers. Next we have a bool. Now Boolean, this is a Boolean. You call it by typing the word bool, and this can be two things. It can either be true or it can be false, one of the two, or it can be 0 for false or 1 for true. So it basically just stores a 1 or a 0 in there, and that's all it does. The next thing we have is a char. This is a character variable, and this stores exactly one character. And we're going to get more into these in the future because this can get, again, really complicated really quickly as well. We're going to have a whole separate video on characters and strings because they can get complicated. Speaking of strings, we have a string, and a string is exactly what it sounds like. It's a string of words, and we're going to name this my string because we can't use string as a name. Now that brings me to the point. What happens if you try and name something string? Well, it's not going to work. It won't let you name this string, as well as it won't let me name it integer as well. And it cannot start with a number. It can't start with a number, and it can't have any special characters, such as like this. It cannot have any special characters in the name. The only special character it can have is an underscore. So that's just, so it can be like my string, like that, and that's a different naming convention. I typically like the just one word like that. And a string can hold any number or any size string, so it can actually hold our hello YouTube string if we want it to. Again, we just have to close it off with the semicolon. The next thing that we have is an unsigned character. Again, that's really complicated. We're not going to get into that. We have a long integer. I'm going to go ahead and skip all the special types of integers because we're going to run out of time. All the special types. We're going to get more into variables in the future. I'm just going to show the basic ones. So the first off, we have a float. And this is a decimal point number that we can store in memory. And this can be anything like 2.65, and it has a range of 3.4e, so that's a very large number, plus or minus 38. So that's, I know, really complicated. I'm not entirely sure what the range is. It's quite large, like the integer. But all we know is that it's a single precision, and we'll get more into that in the future as well. Just know that that's how we store decimal points, is that they're in floats. Again, you don't need to know all this technical stuff just yet, just know how to declare them and what they are. Next we have a double, and this is the same as a float, except it stores twice as much. It has double precision. Then we have, that's actually it. So we have the integer, the unsigned integer, and everything else has an unsigned value too. We have the Boolean, we have a string, we went over character, and then we again have the float, which is equal to 3.14. Well, 3.14 pi. So our float is pi. Our pi float. So that's it for this episode, guys. I know it kind of got a little complicated again. Next episode we're going to tone it down a little bit and really start to cover some basic topics. These are just things that I wanted to cover first so that we can kind of dive in a little bit more. So thank you for watching. If I confused you at all, or if you have any other questions, leave them in the comments and I'll be sure to answer them as promptly as possible. And I'll see you around.